Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining in on Sprinto and Cyberhub's webcast. We're here to discuss how companies can build a security first culture as they move up market. The goal of this webinar is to understand how security can move from being a triviality to an org wide priority. Joining us today are Saeem Khan and Eddie Elator from CyberHub. Both of these powerhouse InfoSec leaders are here to talk about how to build the security first culture. Eddie is an InfoSec leader who's had immense experience in spearheading security roles in organizations and is currently the managing director at CyberHub. Saeem comes with over 15 years of experience in implementing GRC systems and currently holds the role of principal consultant at CyberHub. Eddie and Saim will be taking up questions, so don't forget to key them in on the Q&A tab to your side, and we will be answering them as they come. So if you have any follow-ups, feel free to add it to your chat as well. All right, nice to have you guys on board.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, let me jump right into it. Eddie, what are some things that security leaders get wrong about InfoSec and compliances?
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to actually start with just a small introduction into this. This is where we have to go back to the roots, okay, as to how things have actually occurred and why we're having the same problems today. So, for example, at the moment, technology is actually advancing. The way we work, the way we do things, the way we present our organizations actually changing day by day. Now, when COVID came in, that was the best example of it. And we've seen so many organizations which have actually gone to the online structure rather than actually the in-house or in-office structure as well. Unfortunately, it's actually shown how it's shown the harsh environment of being online, for example, from all these cyber attacks which have actually occurred to these organizations, and it shows how unprepared they were, okay, in relation to this. So the problem is that there's a lot of organizations at the moment where they consider cyber awareness or cyber security as any type of security, which means that it's something that we are to address once and that's it, and we move away from it. And this is the wrong part. And this is why people are actually wrong. Reason being that a lot of CEOs out there and a lot of CTOs and CFOs, they look at cybersecurity as something, as expenditure, as what's it called? So as a payable, okay, and not something that where it's actually making them any money. So in order to, you have to actually arrange that this is actually a savior. So for example, when I actually have a very nice car, for example, the first thing I'll do is try and actually insure that car. Now, you hope that nothing happens to it, and you hope that you're going to actually stay away from trouble. However, no one's actually guaranteeing it, especially, for example, when you're driving that car through a jungle somewhere, okay? And this is cybersecurity. People, CEOs, CFOs, and CTOs need to come to the realization that although this is actually where they'll be spending a bit of money, however, the amount of money that they'll be saving is tremendous and enormous. The way we need to bring it across to them is as follows, where you need to show them how much loss their company or organization or entity will actually face in the event of a cyber attack. Okay, and what are not just the current outcomes of it, of basically the money loss, what is the loss down the track in the future in relation to publicity? And that's very important. And hence, this is why we need to actually bring it forward. So even if you have a look at the moment, you look at, for example, in 2023, it's expected that the loss through cybersecurity is almost close to 8 trillion US dollars. Okay. Wow. 2025, we're looking at it to reach about 10.5 trillion US dollars. So just these numbers alone at the end of the day can actually make people sweat and open their eyes wide about how they need to tackle security, how they need to actually tackle cybersecurity. If we go back to insurance organizations, for example, or insurance companies, when insurance first came out, the first things first was they used to actually tell you need a security guard, or you need a gate, or you need a padlock, you need cameras, and so forth and so forth. So they started adding these things in order to make sure that they're secured and also the client also secured. Now, the thing is that insurance companies adding all these effects to it. So this is how we will look at GRC today. It's like adding all these onto a certain organization to make sure that sometimes you won't prevent it. However, you can actually delay it or you actually minimize it or mitigate it at least.
Okay. Sam, would you like to add to Eddie's note?
I think Eddie's covered it quite broadly because the core aspect is that look, not every company is the same, but looking at these core realities which all companies face, I think he's managed to cover that quite well. I will just add one more point to this, which is that a lot of people assume that and cybersecurity are synonymous, but cybersecurity or information security or digital security, whichever aspect you want to look at it from, is actually a whole of business concern. So it does require the business to come to the table. So that's the one, I guess, preface aspect that all organizations should be looking at.
Okay. All right, that's fair. That's fair. Uh, Actually, Eddie, you brought up a very interesting point about loss for companies, like the kind of consequences that companies are facing due to security issues. So, as we know, currently, if you're looking at Uber or Facebook or sorry, Meta and other high profile organizations, we are currently in the era of well publicized data breaches and compromises, and of course extensive PR campaigns that companies pool millions of money into to mitigate the fallout that comes from these kind of serious problems. So, to put it into context for leaders of growing companies, how big a role does security play when it comes to shaping the future of your company, not just from a reputation point of view, but from a revenue point of view? Like, what's the axis along which security, contributes, or security influences the future plans of an organization?
Okay,
Time
I'll
to
be honest. Yep. So I
yeah.
believe Sim is probably better person to actually answer this, since it actually falls under the GRC concept, and that is actually forte. So Sim, please, I'll get you to take this one if that's okay.
No, no,
Yes.
no, no, absolutely. Look, to answer the question at a high level, security contributes to a plan along multiple axes, because, like I just mentioned, it's a whole of business impact that cybersecurity have. So, and we should move away from thinking about it as just an IT problem. So, and just to put it in context, right? So, if we talk about cybersecurity. So, just off the top of my head, there are a few things which I think everyone will understand and relate to. The first one is, think about it from the perspective of competitive advantage. Um, if you, for example, Arti, had to select between two vendors, and one of those vendors submitted a copy of their ISO certificate, and they also submitted a copy of their pen test report, whereas the other vendor didn't. And this is a vendor that you are selecting to get, assistance on some kind of IT infrastructure or some kind of data access. Who would you naturally gravitate towards? Obviously, the one with the
That is
certifications
the
and the
one.
pen testing and assurance, right? So
Definitely.
cybersecurity, first of all, yeah. So it offers you a competitive advantage, and that allows you to differentiate between, um, you know, uh, that allows you to differentiate yourself between competition. The second aspect that leads to is also innovation. So, for example, organizations which are now trying to keep users on. For example, let's talk about SaaS companies, organizations that want to keep people on their platforms. Like when we talk about stickiness of platform, there's only so many innovations within the product feature set that you can do. So you need to start thinking broadly. Security offers you that canvas where you can start looking at innovation and security. For example, secure sharing, granular data access control. These are features which are now increasingly becoming differentiators between why a company would choose to go for a SaaS platform versus another one, which may not have anything to do with security. I'm talking about, for example, I don't want to use any brand names, but knowledge management, where you have different wikis as a SaaS service. All of those, the ones that are becoming more successful are the ones that are offering more granular access control, where content can be controlled in terms of access and things like that. For example, another way would be to have some kind of a sharing mechanism through which you can granularly control who you're sharing information with. You have better user roles defined. So these are the things that drive better platform adoption and would get your potential and actual users to stay on platform. So it drives innovation. The third thing that I can think of is more about general risk management. When you start looking at cybersecurity as a vector of risk management, you can actually get all of your business to start thinking and pulling in the same direction. For example, let's say product, you have, let's say, multiple teams. You've got finance, you've got product, you've got operations, and you've got sales. All four of these departments have different mandates, and all four of them are looking at their operations from from their own perspective only. Finance only cares about ARs and APs. Finance only cares about budgeting and meeting those budgets. Sales only cares about bringing in revenue and having a sustainable sales plan, a revenue plan. Product only cares about understanding the voice of the customer and translating it to good features and then bringing out innovative offerings. So driving adoption across all of this, security becomes that common risk management vector, because all three, four of these departments, for example, share that risk in unauthorized data access, unauthorized data integrity compromises, and so on and so forth. So it offers that risk management. And lastly, and this links up to all the three things that I've just mentioned, is compliance. Compliance is now increasingly becoming a driver for business differentiation. So, and if you're, for example, working in an industry that's regulated, compliance is something you have to maintain. And as we are seeing, not just in Australia, but in other regions as well. For example, I'm currently connecting via the Middle East, and there's a huge push towards, regulations around information security and data security. So, compliance is now becoming a operational reality, and that's where cybersecurity and information security can play a role. So these are just the, top four things that come to mind. But I mean, we can have a whole discussion on this. I mean, we can have a whole webinar just talking about all the benefits that contributions that cybersecurity makes to a business.
And yes, we definitely should have that. I'm definitely having that in the pipeline now. Let's I think talk about the macroeconomic elephant in the room. The economic downturn and budget cuts and tight purse strings. All leaders now have to build business cases as to why they need specific budget X to do justice to their jobs, because everything is under the microscope right now. So, what's the one metric, Eddie, do you think security leaders must look at and report, to build a business case to correlate between security risk and its resultant impact on the business?
Okay, so to be honest with you, so over here, it's at the end of the day, it relates to how you can actually convince the CEOs about what kind of metric you need to use, or what kind of metric leaders should actually use or look at and report to build a case or correlation between security risk and also between business impact. There is no one size fits all at the end of the day. However, there are two main factors over here that you can have a look at and it all depends on an organization's unique factors, okay? And what's it called? Security leaders can actually use it to build a correlation between security risk and between business, and also put a metric in place. So these metrics, let's say you've got the MTTD, for example, which is the mean time to detect, and you've also got the MTTR, which is the mean time to respond. And the lower these are for each and every organization. So, for example, the lower the MTTD is, or the mean time to detect, or the average amount of that in order to detect any kind of risk or threat, okay, the faster the organization can actually respond, and the faster the organization can actually report any of those matters to external organizations or to government. And that's the only metric that we can actually use, which is a detection and response. Now, another thing that you can actually utilize as well is have a look at each organization and see, okay, what does this organization offer, and how would a cyber attack or a cyber threat affect that organization, or also affect how this organization can actually perform. So, for example, let's say with Meta, for example, let's say people out there don't have any information that is necessary. However, anything that actually happens there, that means you need to actually bring to the public or bring to organizations, to CEOs about how much is it, or what is it that they have uh, which is the biggest loss for them. Some people it might be publicity, okay. Other people it might be a product. Let's say for example, you have software companies where the software can actually get entangled in this and not have the correct output. So and this is very important. So it's just that metric standard that we can actually bring into each and every organization and actually specify it for that organization in order to be able to go, okay, this is where we're at the moment. And this is how we can actually, well, not control it. However, this is how we can put it into a concrete form. And it's unfortunate because cyber has never been concrete while it's happening, or the threat of it happening has never been concrete. However, unfortunately, the effects of it can actually be concrete within any organization that it affects.
Okay, that is interesting. I want to understand this part. How do you quantify something like reputation, or how do you quantify something like, this could lead to a PR disaster? Do you do it in terms of revenue, like what?
Well, every single organization has its different way of actually quantifying it, okay, or basically putting it into concrete. So for example, let's go back to what happened in Australia a few months ago with what's it called, with Optus, for example, or with some kind of what's it called, NBA as well. What happened to them? And so how many customers did they lose? Let's have a look at prior to the cyber attack, how many customers they had and what the
Mhm.
revenue was. And let's have a look after the attack, how many customers did they maintain and what they had. What was their growth rate prior to the cyber attack and what was their growth rate after the cyber attack? How much did it cost them to actually resolve this incident as well? How much did they actually provide? How much did they provide their clients in insurances, in insurance payments to actually reach it? So that's the only way we can actually quantify. So each single organization, unfortunately, you will not know how much the actual amount is until it happens. The problem is that the ongoing effects, that ripple effect for each and every organization. Okay. So, for example, at an early stage, user signups are a critical metric. For example, if reputation loss happens, that will drop. Okay, so if a startup like needs to think about how much of a loss in user signups will equal to a disaster. Okay, what's it called? So a startup that is actually scaling up, it's about to have consistency and experience, and it's also have a maintaining revenue. Okay,
Mhm.
reputational loss can also lead to loss of revenue as well, and that's very important. This is why the prior to an attack happening, you wouldn't know. However, after an attack happening, this is where you start actually feeling it. But the problem is, what is the extent of that ripple effect? No one knows. Okay, every single organization over there, it takes years and years and years, okay, for that ripple effect to almost come to an end. And yet people will still refer back and say, this is what happened to this organization such and such years back. So it still affects it. And people will start going towards organizations which don't have that, which haven't experienced that. So let's compare it to airlines, for example. People say, Simon, I'm very sorry to bring this up. I know you're traveling these days. So with airlines, for example, you actually have a look at their rates of accidents or incidents. Okay, when you have an airline that's got a higher rate of accidents and incidents, you tend not to actually go there. And I actually look at one that myself. Sometimes I actually stay at an airport for 14 hours waiting because there's a certain airline which I don't want to use because of their track record, and where I prefer to actually use something else. So, and there's other people out there, and the same thing happens with organizations. Same thing happens with entities. People are actually willing, most probably, to pay a bit extra in order to get the better product, or actually have all their information and data saved, rather than pay a bit less and go to an organization where we'll promise you that we'll look after you, or we'll promise you a payout if anything happens. Certain organizations don't want to pay out. They just want to make sure that they're secure and their data's secure, and that's it. Okay. So as I said, it's MTDs, MTTDs, and MTTRs at the end of the day. Or when you look at them, It's something that you're telling your organization that you have the ability to quantify it in actual time. So unfortunately, this is actually a time method rather than a concrete method of what's actually the profits and losses over here.
But I think that is also good, because if like, as you mentioned, right, and I agree with you that I think the most important metrics to every company are MTDD and MTDR. And when you go back to quantifying loss in, real world value, so to speak, Arti, the ability to say that, look, we have the capability in house right now to figure out that there's a data issue or there's a data breach. It'll take us maybe 5 days after it occurs. And in 5 days, we can actually have this much damage occur, which can affect that. And by the way, it'll take us about 3 days to respond to it. So that's 8 days of constant attack. So how much do you make a day? Multiply that by 8. So it's that simple, right? So let's say
Yeah.
if one of our attendees is a scale up, and they are looking at they're currently generating $5,000 a day in revenue. So that's $40,000 in revenue that is at risk. So then the question becomes, okay, are we willing to spend $2,000 or $3,000 to secure that 40? Or is that still too much? Or is that too little? Or we are willing to spend up to 25%. Let's say we're willing to spend up to 10,000 to secure that to secure that 40. So these are the kind of questions that when you speak on these terms, they kind of then, make the picture very black and white. Otherwise, saying reputational loss, yeah, reputational loss equals loss of customers or loss of revenue or loss of sign up. So and look, this is a typical scenario with scale ups. You need to go back to your VCs and your investors and show that you have a consistently rising curve of user adoption and user signups. Reputational loss represents a cliff dive. So even though it's not a monetary value, it's still a number that makes sense to the business. So if, let's say startup X has experienced a data breach and it's publicized, who's going to sign up for that service, especially at a time when they're scaling up? So these are things which, like Eddie rightfully said, there isn't a one size fits all, but there are certain aspects which are common to all organizations.
Okay, that's actually really really detailed and very useful. Thank you so much for that. I think often we talk about consequences in a very broad term. We see it on newspapers and then we say, oh, that happened, and we let like that we just register in our mind. But the actual implications is almost daunting to know. Like, this is what happens. That's nice to know. Also, a cautionary tale for all the attendees who are watching. Simon, I want to also understand, you know, the aim of this webcast is to talk about how do you build a forward-thinking approach to security? How do you build a culture around information security? Do you see how automation can help in this place, or do you think that risk management and compliance and security and all of this still needs to have a different approach to it, or do you think that automation can help solve this problem?
Okay. Automation can, like, short answer, yes, it can help. And the reason why it should be a prioritized approach to look at is because, everyone who's listening and or joined this webinar is part of a startup or is, either a part of a startup that's growing. And as you know, the first 3-4 years of a startup are fairly chaotic. You have no processes. You're kind of, just winging it as you go along. So, and by the time you get to a point, then you're at this, and I know I'm going off on a bit of tangent, so bear with me. Um, by the time you get to a point where, you can invest in processes and things like that, then this question comes up of, oh, do we sacrifice culture for process? And that's where, you have a lot of people that can come or leave the business. So how do you manage that? So automation is a good way to address that, because if you enable automation from day one, then you are automatically pushing a process, and that's a process that doesn't have anything to do with any individuals. It is actually, yep, this is the way we do things, and it's automated. So there's no one particular individual or group of individuals driving that process. So it's not their individual or collective cognitive biases being introduced into that process. And there are five core areas which I do think that all organizations should look at within a security context. The first is user on and offboarding. How are your users added and offboarded into your organization? And this doesn't just mean signing them up on your Outlook or your G Suite platform. It's also about what are the different applications they're going to get access to and having that framework in place. So looking at some kind of an SSO platform which you use from day one, so that you are ready to scale. That's the first. The second is looking. I'm going to go from people, process, and technology. So from the
Okay.
people side, the second is training and awareness. So having some kind of a automated training regime that is implemented is something definitely that is going to be beneficial and will allow you to scale. The third is looking more along the lines of, now we're going into more technology and process, is looking at two aspects. One is vulnerability identification and management, having some kind of an automated vulnerability identification process and tool, which not only identifies but also adds it into whatever ticketing system you use, so whether using Jira or Trello or whatever. And then the second aspect is also looking at that from a threat detection and response perspective. Automation can help you detect those threats, and then you don't need to implement a full-blown SIEM. You don't even need to implement any kind of visualization or orchestration or anything like that. You just need to have good workflows in place, and having those workflows is really what automation is about. If you have a good workflow, it's going to translate well as you scale up. If you have a bad workflow, doesn't matter what systems you use, it's going to be bad. And the last aspect, which kind of brings all of this together, is compliance management. So how is your user onboarding, training, threat detection, vulnerability management, communication management, how is it all coming together, and how are you actively able to show compliance against a particular framework, whether it's ISO or PCI or GDPR or whatever have you, right? Or SOC 2. So all of these come together to bring automation as something which can be a force for good. It's a long-winded answer, but I tried to put it in perspective of the audience that we have here today.
Yeah, I think this was very, very helpful. Eddie, do you have anything to add to it?
I believe that's it. I'm not sure. Sorry, I sort of wandered off there for a second. Simon, did you mention anything about exercises to the staff and also, bless you, exercises where you can actually launch, for example, events on any startup organization, such as actually the recreation of some phishing emails for that organization, or doing some, what's it called? Social engineering towards staff members within that organization, and see whether they can actually stand up to the challenge or not. This is something that will be much more interesting also in order to include in this. As I said, you are the guru of this, but this is something where I look at from the non-technical side from where I stand, however.
No, agreed 100%. And that's part of what your training and awareness program would include. So, you have content that goes out where you educate people about threats and dangers, and then you have training and testing as well, where you are saying, okay, so what have you retained, what knowledge do you understand? So 100% agreed. Like, you added a very nice extra level of detail to that. So yeah, 100% I agree. And look, I'm not the guru. I'm just an old dinosaur who's still in cyber, so please.
Now that's an exaggeration.
Brother, you're very, what's it called, humble.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that having the conversation around how to how to stress the importance of security in the workforce. Do you think it's the do you feel rather do you feel that this is the responsibility of board, the modern board, to build these risk management systems or to set these practices in place? And if you do agree, how do you think they can make a meaningful contribution here? How do you think that they can help the security leader with it?
Sorry, who are we referring to over here? Sorry.
Like, for instance, if we look at, let's just envision like a modern board of directors where like security, like they need to understand, like, how do you make them contribute to the vision of the company security as a whole? How do you influence them to think from a security mindset and rather than just their own metrics and their own goals towards the organization?
I'll be honest with you. Sorry, Simon. I'm just actually going to just throw something over here, as I said, from the non-technical side, and I'll let you take the technical side of things. There's a saying always in any organization out there, in order to actually implant something into anyone, you need to plant the fear of God into them. The only way to do this, believe it or not, and it's true, people always get scared when they actually see something. However, if they don't understand it, they're never scared of it because they don't understand it. It's never affected them. But if you go into a board, for example, and you show them, or you execute, let's say, for example, some kind of a fake cyber attack to show them what their organization will actually, what will happen to their organization, what will happen to their communication, what will happen to their staffing, what will happen to their data. That's actually that might actually push them across the edge to ensure at the end of the day that cyber can actually become part of every single meeting that they actually conduct. Okay, so rather than basically as Simon mentioned earlier, rather than actually having people that represent the finance team and people that represent the product team and others that actually represent the treasury sit down ensuring how the company should move forward, you know what? Cyber should also be present to ensure that that company keeps on moving forward. So
Yeah.
what they need to understand is that, yes, all these elements are very important. However, what is the driver for these elements to keep on going forward without actually having spikes on the road in order to actually halt that process or basically slow it down? So, and that's very important. That's what you need to show them.
Okay.
Um,
Sam, like that do it?
yeah, no, 100% I agree. There is let's take the modern board and like put it aside for a second. Boards are made up of people. These people are mandated to provide overarching governance to the companies that they're on the boards of, right? They're also personally liable for the advice that they give, or the direction that they influence that the company goes in. In all of this, what's happening now is, or governments and legislation is kind of going towards the fact that these directors or these board members are now personally liable for the decisions that they take for an organization, which can include a cybersecurity, like an adverse effect, like a cybersecurity breach. So board members are starting to take cybersecurity more seriously because it impacts their personal interests, impacts their personal reputation, impacts their personal liability. So, in light of all of this, you have a group of people that are motivated to talk about this. That's one aspect. Now, let's talk about the cyber leader in your question. Now, you work in marketing. If I came and started talking to you about the benefits of HubSpot or other marketing systems, because one uses Node.js as its backend and the other one uses, some other, web technology, and I started extolling the virtues of those, would you care? Even though having a marketing CRM is important to you, you wouldn't, right? So I'm speaking to you on aspects and perspectives that absolutely mean nothing to you. So as a cybersecurity leader, if I'm to speak to the modern board, which is in one word, petrified of cybersecurity, and I come start talking to them about, oh, we need to implement a new firewall, we need to implement these certain practices in our cloud environment, it's just going to go zoop, right? So it's not really going to mean anything. Instead, if I came and I started talking about, hey, like, what Eddie said, look, I'm only here to talk to you about three things. One is our average time to detect a breach is 5 minutes. We need to bring it down to one. Oh, sorry, it's 5 hours. We need to bring it down to less than 1 hour. And our current capability to respond to events is 5 days. I need to bring it down to a day. Isn't that something which makes sense to anybody? Rather than talking about, hey, we need to implement this new firewall, we need to implement new tools and things like that. So really, if you think about it, that is where the conversation should be. Now, the actual crux of your question is, how does this translate to risk management? As a board member, risk management is not something which one would get involved in directly, but they would definitely influence it, and they'd want management to tell them that what is happening with the state of affairs and where are the risks that they see. But there are, like I said, general risks that would apply from a cybersecurity perspective. So as a board member, I don't believe that it is their direct responsibility to build risk management systems, but their meaningful contribution could be, for example, if there are any board members on this webinar, something which you can take back to your meetings is how long does it take for us to detect that a breach has occurred? And how long does it take for us to respond to it? And those are two questions which are very straightforward. And if someone can't answer that question, that means there is not a lot of thought put into it. So there's your first risk. We have no way to detect, so we need to do that. The second is, it's at X, but we should aim for Y. So that's how I think that's a conversation that board members can contribute towards risk systems or risk discussions.
Okay. I actually I wanted to hone in on one word that you mentioned, which is that board members are petrified of security. Do you think it comes from the lack of awareness, like they don't know the nitty gritty of it, or is it because it's a whole thing of its own, and like they'd rather focus on something else than learn about something that's powerful, threatening, yet fairly unknown to them?
It's actually a combination of everything that you've mentioned, because put yourself in the shoes of a board member. You are suddenly now liable for the company's well-being, or based on factors you don't understand. It's like I'll give an example as a parent. It's like being the parent of a 5-year-old, and being told that if your child falls sick, then family services is going to come and take your kid away, right? It like scares you. But
Yeah.
okay, why will my child get sick? I'm generally asking, making sure that they're eating healthy, their hygiene as well. But like, what do I need to do? Then you start honing in on it, right? So what you try to understand, it's not also, unfortunately, we live in a world of over sensationalization, where there is a responsibility, and there's always been even a fiscal responsibility on board directors to maintain, upstanding decisions and upstanding conduct. But it's not changed. It's now that cybersecurity has become a vector. So I think it's a combination of I don't understand, and suddenly I'm now liable for more. So that's why they're petrified. We fear what, like as Eddie mentioned, we fear what we don't know, especially when, and it's more along the lines of we fear that there's a really bad outcome happening, or that's bound to happen, but we don't know why. And that's what I think organizational board members need to then kind of hone in on a bit more. Does that answer your question?
Actually, yeah, it definitely does. And I mean, I really appreciate the analogy as well. Like it quite puts to perspective the feeling or the fear.
Mm.
Okay. This is my final question before we jump into the Q&A section. We have a couple questions from LinkedIn as well. So everyone, those who are attending, please key in your Q&A. We will be getting to that in the next 5 minutes, and then I'll be bringing in the 10-minute time check. So please add your questions if you have any for like Eddie and Sai. Okay. So let me get to the last one. So this is again, I think we already covered an aspect of it, but it's got more to do with influencing internal buy-in. Like how do you do it in an organization which spans 350 to 500 people? It's not just the C-suite. You're talking about people who are directors who report to the C-suite, who have their team of their own, and then those middle managements who have their own team. So when it comes to an organization tree where the CISO cannot directly go to a market a mid management marketing person to show the fear of God to them. How do you make this? How do you influence internal buying from the top down?
Okay. I think to answer this question, I'll give you another example. So back in the 60s when John Kennedy, the former US president, was still alive, he visited NASA and he spoke to one of the janitors there. And he said, what do you do here? He said, oh, I'm putting a man on the moon, right?
Yeah.
So from the janitor up to the people working on the actual Apollo program, everybody was combined towards one vision. So from a security perspective, the first thing as a security leader that I need to do is I need to understand the organization's values and goals. And I need to find out where security fits in that. It's not the other way around. Ultimately, as a responsible security leader, I am still a servant to the organization. And I need to understand what are the organization's goals and where does security fit in them? Where does it enable or hinder the goals? So when you start thinking about it from that perspective, and I'll give you some very concrete examples. I mean, it's nice to say these airy-fairy TED Talk type things, but we'll go into concrete examples as well. You can then actually be able to have meaningful conversations at any level in the organization, whether it's with board, management, unit leaders, or individual staff. So let's take an example of tech startups which are scaling up. What are the most critical things for them as an organization at that point? You need to talk about scaling up users. You need to talk about reducing friction. You need to talk about maintaining velocity of development teams. So where does security come into all of that? So for every organization, it will mean something different. So when we're talking about user adoption is a combination of marketing, user interface design, as well as your customer success. How does security enable it? And you don't have to think about, security will have a contribution to everything. It may not, but it can help inform better decisions. So if the sign up process needs to be improved, how can security enable? By maybe promoting SSO. A single sign on may mean more people can access your platform quicker. From a marketing perspective, working with a marketing team to publish a security white paper as a differentiator, and then promoting the heck out of it. So this is how you promote security within the organization. When you're talking to the boards, we've already talked extensively about that, one or two metrics. When you're talking with management, you talk about how security enables everything. When you're talking with, let's say, people and culture, you take a look at the values that the company has and you think about how security enables those values. For example, most tech companies have, we are honest, we commit to honest deadlines. Okay, so from an honest deadlines perspective, how can security help? It can help in the form of promoting integrity, promoting that you are informing of any challenges or any issues that come up, and security can help you by doing X, Y, and Z, which may vary from company to company. A lot of the values also talk about innovation. So you think about where does innovation and we've spoken about this earlier on, where does security play a role in innovation? And promoting the idea of security and things like that. Now we'll flip it slightly. We will slightly take a different view on this as well. Is that ultimately the company's most prized assets are its revenues and its customer base, and both of these are underpinned by one thing, which is data. So we take the security of our data very seriously. And to enable and promote the security of our data, we must do things which sometimes may be painful or annoying, but they are there for the greater good. And we take that approach instead of saying, instead of talking about, oh, we should do this because we don't want to get hacked. Nobody wants to it's just like saying nobody wants to get hit, but you don't use that as an excuse to load someone up with elbow guards and shin guards and a helmet and ask them to cross the street. Instead, you talk about something. Which is a bit more. Sorry, we just saw a question.
Yeah. I'm just pinning it on screen.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can wrap up your answer.
Let's jump into that. Yeah. Yeah. So look, all I'm going to say is that we should then just promote that, right? Promote it in the context of what matters most to the organization. So now to answer Rajesh's question, I can know what all is needed and action and time frame needed to have this done. Details, please. Concrete details and directions. Okay, so um, it depends on the kind of board members you have. From the example that Rajesh has mentioned, it sounds like the board members are very much hands-on, or they want to get to get a bit more details. The one of the best ways to do this is each of the metrics that you are talking about, or each of the projects you're talking about, you need to link it to a critical success factor for your business. So, for example, if you're talking about the whole concept of MTTR and MTTD, you can go and link it back to, let's say, improving platform uptime, or improving service uptime. And this is an initiative that is a critical success factor if you want to talk about growing your business. Now, in terms of concrete details and directions, well, that really comes down to how much level of detail. I don't think any board member wants to know what developer A and developer B and developer C are doing. They're more focused on the outcome that's going to be out there. So I hope that answers your question, but if you want to add more detail, we can go from there.
Okay.
Okay, so key metrics and KPIs that a scale up should track to measure the effectiveness of their program. All right, so the key metrics, in my opinion, that I should look at is the compliances that it meets or conforms to. So either it's certified or it's at least conforming to. You need to take a look at MTTR and MTTD. You need to take a look at whether you have okay, cool. So those are some, yeah. So those are some core questions that core metrics that would be there. I'll also see if I can put a list for everyone's benefit. But okay, so to answer your follow-up question, Rajesh, about in terms of tooling and resource investment. Okay, so if you go to a board member and say, I need to implement a particular brand of firewall, wouldn't really care. They want to know why you are investing. So the details that follow up with that needs to come and go back to a humanistic story, a human-oriented story. We need to upgrade our capability. To upgrade our capability, we need investments in technology, we need investments in people. So, and this will result in this outcome, which is that we are able to we are able to detect events faster, we're able to respond to events faster, we're able to provide continued assurance that our services are, and our platform is being serviced and provided in a secure way. So it needs to go back to that humanistic element of what's the company outcome that you're trying to get this to. If you go into detailed project plans and proposals, your board members is going to be like, nah, I'm not interested. I just need to know what's the top line item, what's the outcome that I'm going to get out of this, and how long will it take to execute.
Sorry,
now, if you're asking about, sorry, go on,
ahead.
Eddie.
No, go ahead, please. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just saying that, look, if you're asking for in terms of details of tooling and resources, I can't answer that because I don't know much about your business. Are you cloud-based? Are you on-prem? Are you providing an app? Are you providing PaaS? Are you providing IaaS? Are you providing just services? It really depends, and that's something which will require that further level of investigation before I can say which tools you need to do. I mean, if you're talking about how do you present this to a board member, I mean, good old PowerPoint or equivalent presentation software is enough. But the core point is why, what, and what key outcome this contributes to.
So I just wanted to actually add one thing to what Simon was saying, Rajesh, and that goes to you. What you need to try and do over here is actually link what your organization does to the CIA triad, for example, where you need to understand over here what is very important for your organization. What does your organization do over here, whether it's basically between confidentiality, integrity, or basically availability. So you have a look at what your sources are, or what your outcome is, or what is it, what's the service that you have, and then what's more important for that service. Once you understand, or once you actually are aware of that, then you would know what kind of sources to utilize to ensure to actually make it much better for yourself. So once you actually bring it down to that, you'll understand basically which kind of resources to use or utilize, and that will actually give you a bit of an understanding as to the amount of time that it'll take you to implement those, and also the expenses that are involved in it as well.
All right. Rajesh, I hope that answered your question. Uh,
Yeah, I think he said he. Yeah.
all right. Okay. So we are at the last 5 minutes check. I'm just going to give you some time to ask any other questions if you have. In the meantime, I would like to thank Saim and Eddie for taking the time to do this. It's been extremely insightful. Personally speaking, I learned a lot about like security, the business point of view, which is just fantastic to know more about it. As I'm not an engineer, I do not know the technical aspect, but I sure do get the business aspect of it. So I really appreciate you guys for taking the time.
Just give me 1 minute. Yeah.
And so, yes, if you would like to get in touch with Eddie or Sign, I'm just linking CyberHub's website over here. You guys can reach out to them over there in the contact us page, and they'd be more than happy to help you out. If you, as always, Sprinto is committed to helping growing startups automate their InfoSec requirements so they can scale and grow with confidence. If you would like to reach out to our compliance leaders to understand how we do what we do, click the banner on your top right corner to get started. I'm just waiting to see. Yes, Saim has also put together a list like threat detection and response strategy. I'm just pinning it so you can see it right now and just like copy it. These are some important metrics that you need to keep in mind. It's fairly extensive. Take a look at that. If you have any other questions, you can reach out to them on stage. Yes. Oh, we have a question. So yes, how about for application security SaaS services which are cloud based? How do you influence the top management on this? Looking into data privacy.
Okay, once again, depends on two things. So first is what kind of app you're providing, and if you're collecting personal information. Now, if like for example, if you take a look in the Indian context, India now has its own data privacy legislation, which does require organizations to pay particular attention to the security of the data relating to individuals. If you look at any global, and if you're, let's say, a startup in India looking to look at global operations, you will have to deal with data privacy, whether it's GDPR in Europe, whether it's CCPA or CCRA in the US, or whether it's the Australian Privacy Act in Australia, or if it's the PDPA in Singapore, or you've got regionals. In fact, even China has their own privacy legislation. So look, the way that you influence top management, one sure shot way is to link it to a legal exposure. So you will be in lack of legal compliance if you go down this path. The second is to take a look at cloud-based. You can take a look at talk to your cloud service provider. So if it's AWS, GCP, or Azure, whatever, talk to them about the different benefits that you can get from the on-platform services that exist, and use that to build your case. For example, if you're talking about AWS, look at Compliance Manager and Macy's trial version to kind of get access to data security. If you're using Azure, look at Information Protection Trial to see if you can get particular data. But your goal should be to take this to management saying, hey, this is our current reality. We have a risk of legal exposure and legal non-compliance. What do you want to do? And then let them come up with the answer that, hey, we need to invest in this.
I hope that answers your question. If you have follow-ups, please feel free to reach out. Yeah, I think unfortunately though we are at a time check. So Saim and Eddie have been kind enough to put their email IDs as well. Please reach out to them if you want to talk more about this. If you want to know more about compliance and automation, please reach out to sales@sprinto.com. They will be happy to take up a consulting call with you first to understand your needs and then tell you what the next steps need to be. With that, I thank you for your time, and we come to the end of the session. Thank you and have a really nice day.